First of all, let me just be talking about what is a cluster, what do we mean by that when we use that term? Well, it's important to realize that we're really talking about sort of a series of interdependent industries, not just one industry, but a set of industries that are connected to each other. One of them that I'll be talking about is, for instance, when you talk about tourism, it's connected to other activities here in the county in terms of services that support tourism, travel, also the wine industry. That's an example of a set of clustering of industries that are important. The second thing I want to point out is that when you do the analysis, you'll notice that their concentration is higher here than other places, and that shows up in talent. In terms of workforce, you have a specialized workforce, sort of infrastructure that supports these industries, and also there are a set of buyer-supplier linkages. I was pointing out there's small businesses here, but they also sell to some of the other businesses here. So this is what a cluster is. It's sort of the connections are so important, and sort of maintaining and growing those connections, and that's what a cluster strategy can do for you. They create a source of regional advantage, and I want to point this out, it's so important. One of the reasons why Sonoma has had that advantage of growing is that there's certain key industries here. You need to look at the overall economy, then you break it down to its pieces and understand what are the advantages of these critical industries in the global economy as well as domestically. How are you going to grow jobs and wealth from that? Now, why are clusters so important? Well, we sometimes use this phrase, growing economies based on clusters. They're so important because they do two things. They're the source of prosperity for people who live here, but also, they also generate those critical public revenues that are going to be necessary for government to be successful. Now, how do you invest in education? How do you invest in infrastructure to maintain the type of community that's so essential for attracting people here, the talent, and the businesses? So there really is a vital cycle that is critical to the health and vitality of a region. And that community helps grow the clusters. So when people ask you what's the connection between clusters and the community, it really is a vital cycle, and you want to maintain the strength of those critical industries to maintain both the prosperity for people and businesses, but also to grow those revenues that will go back to help the budgets in the county and the cities grow so they can pay for the critical education and infrastructure that's necessary for the communities to prosper. So I think it's important that we keep that in our mind, so it's not just clusters for their own sake, but it's really clusters to grow a strong community. Now, when we did the analysis, working with Steve, he did analysis, we did some analysis, there are some critical industries in this county that are growing. Even during the recession, one that grew significantly was healthcare, continues to grow. But one of the things that you'll hear from the discussion from the people, we're broadening the definition of healthcare. It's important to look at wellness and promotion, not just the services of health. So we looked at not only hospitals and doctors, but also other activities that relate to health and wellness. This is an advantage and an opportunity for Sonoma County, and you're going to hear about that. Manufacturing. Manufacturing is still very important to this region, and it creates output, jobs, and high wages. We think it's advanced manufacturing. There's a set of manufacturing activities here that are going on. For instance, medical technology, which is specialized to this region. Activities that are related to control and electronic components. You're going to hear about that and the importance of maintaining a strong advanced manufacturing base, both in terms of jobs, but also in terms of wealth creation for the region. We call this Sonoma Specialties, and it's really come together from the first Economic Vitality Project, and it's become stronger and stronger. Bringing the tourism industry together in terms of the Sonoma Tourism Bureau was an important step. The next step is to make sure that you have your agriculture industry, your wine industries, all the tourism activities connected to continue to make Sonoma a special place for why global people, you have global tourism, you have people coming here to create wealth and to add on the, if you will, the brand. And you're going to hear more and more about that from the folks that are talking. So those things are connected. They're interrelated. Also, professional, creative, and innovation services. There's software here, legal and financial services, accounting, design services, computer systems design and management, and consulting services. Now, Steve mentioned the importance of small, proprietary companies. Some of these companies are small, but they're important because they add up to a large number of employment. And you have to think about how you grow those small companies. They supply support to the other industries. So that's the notion of connectedness and of buyer-supplier. Very important because it's one of the fastest growing employment sectors in the country today, professional and business services. And people want to live here. So how do you create the environment for people to live here? With internet technology, you can live here and work anywhere in the world. So this is a very important area for further discussion. Now finally, we talked about the green economy, we talked about energy efficiency. The group has got all kinds of ideas here about, we call it in the end, sustainable prosperity. How do we grow prosperity, take advantage of the green economy in construction as well as other areas, for instance, energy efficiency, renewable energy, clean energy, solar, and also waste and water, which is, this region has a great advantage in some of the work that's gone on, not only in areas like retrofits, the work that's going on in household energy efficiency, but also in the water technology area that's starting to develop. So each one of these areas are areas of advantage that we want to talk about today. So you're going to hear from each one of the clusters in terms of people that went through the process. What we did was, first, we gave them information about what these clusters were about. In the first meeting, we asked a fundamental question. What did they think? Now, this is business people, their discussion. What did they see as the opportunities for moving forward in the next 5 years in this region, this county? And then what are the requirements to get there? And each one of the clusters went through that in their first meeting and identified that. Then the next thing we did, when we got back together, we said, okay, now, what are the strategies? What are the specific actions that are necessary to achieve those opportunities? And they told us, and they've developed those action plans. And I want to emphasize that this is what this is all about. It's about specific actions that can be taken by business, working with government and education to move forward the opportunities in these clusters and remove some of the constraints that are in there. And you saw some of the key themes that came out across the areas about branding and workforce and simplifying the regulatory process and also making sure that these clusters are having support from the county and other local organizations. So what you're going to hear is you're going to hear a story about each one of the clusters in terms of what they see as their opportunities and their action plans. But again, I just want to compliment Sonoma County in terms of their leadership in moving forward in this area over the years, and it goes back 15 years, and the first time I was here was 15 years ago, Steve, to stay with this over the time because economies change and you have to adapt to the change, and this is important to have a mechanism to do that. So thank you very much, and now you're going to hear from the individual clusters.
Good morning, I'm Joe Adam. I'm going to start off the cluster overviews with advanced manufacturing. I lead Triformix, which is a local company that produces injection molded optics. When we worked in the cluster, I was quite surprised, being new to the county, how many advanced manufacturing companies are in the county. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the things we're doing. So there are two key themes that really come into the advanced manufacturing business. The first is really, it's a high growth sector business. If you look at medical products, aerospace, biotech, medical devices, optics, plastics, all technologies that really have high value, typically have a global market, but also enable us to produce very cost effectively in Sonoma. The second major component is that the manufacturing we do really is high value. It's high value product that enables us to basically produce at a level in Sonoma where we can make a good profit, but requires a high talent pool, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So key recommendations from the group. The first is that we need to promote Sonoma as a high value manufacturing location. The first piece of this is to just make sure the community is educated about what we do. These are clean industries. They're industries that drive really high income jobs and enable us to produce in a way that we can globally distribute our products from Sonoma. The county supervisors and the board really need to recognize the value of those businesses, and I think we need to get the word out there about really the value it brings to the county in terms of tax revenue and jobs. The second is that it's an industry that changes very rapidly, and one of the key challenges for us is how do we change our businesses on the fly to adjust to not just the economic situations, but also the changing business environment, the changing product mix. And so adjustment and change in this business is really a key to competitiveness. And then third is talent, and really the key to this business today is having world-class talent. How can we compete and build product in Sonoma? We've got to have the best people in the world. We've got a great place to live. I just recently moved from offshore Asia, running a large multinational manufacturing company. Why I'm in Sonoma? Because I want to be here. But in the end, the other folks that want to be here have to have the talent to compete. That's all you get to do every day, is compete in this business. In terms of the outcomes we expect, the first is that if we do a good job of developing talent and promoting manufacturing in Sonoma, we wind up with more jobs. I think that's the end outcome. We've hired this year 6 people. In the last couple months, we're going to be up 40%. The value of the business here is going up very rapidly, but the key for us is really being able to get the right level of talent, starting with kids even in high school up through very well-educated degreed engineers. And one of the challenges here is how do you draw and develop that talent locally? The second component of it is really having a local workforce. As we try to recruit people into Sonoma from all over the globe, one of the key challenges is that a lot of folks don't know about Sonoma. If they're into wine and food, they probably understand the industry, but they know the Bay Area very well. And so I think there's an active need to really promote who we are, what we're doing here beyond the food, wine, well-known industries here, tourism. And ultimately, we need to strengthen the local network of people. I was really pleased to participate in this cluster because the people around the table really have a similar set of challenges to the ones we have at Triformix. They have different businesses. We talked to folks in the medical device business and people in the aerospace business. But they all have these same challenges. They need talented workforce. They need help from the county to be able to be agile and adjust to a development environment. And they really need to be able to communicate what they're doing to the community at large. There are 2 places we think there is a very good ability to collaborate and align with others. The report outcomes were that there are a number of active programs. One of them that's coming on very strongly is the BEST program with the Chamber of Commerce. And so we want to utilize that program, particularly for workforce development and the other areas in terms of development of infrastructure in the county. And Manufacturing 101. The activities in Manufacturing 101 are really starting to focus on education and promotion of professional development. I'm very pleased today, in fact, I'll have a group of high school students into our facility to talk a little bit about what we do and what technology is all about. I think one of the problems we have is that here in the States, only about 5% of college students go into technology-related fields. Having come out of running a large business in China, 20% of the students in China are focused on technology education. I think we need to get kids involved early, even in the preschool levels, all the way up through school and high school. And so today I'm going to have a chance to educate a few kids about what we do. But you've got to get education started early on in the sciences and math. And ultimately, I think some of the programs in both Manufacturing 101 and the BEST program in terms of educational attainment are great opportunities to do that. So I'd really encourage everybody to be very active in participating in those 2 areas. I wanted to thank everybody on the panel. If you can see here, between Blake, Jim, Jeff, a pretty diversified group of companies. One of the things we're going to try to do is get out there more in the county to make sure people understand what we do. We're a small group, but we're growing. If you look at these companies, most of them are up pretty dramatically this year. We'll be up, as I said, about 40%. Most of the other companies have got similar numbers. And as a result, there's direct jobs creation coming out of these groups. But we need your help. We need to really make sure that, first of all, you understand what manufacturing is about, that it's a really good thing for Sonoma, and it's also a thing that's going to enable you to ultimately have high tax revenue, high-paying jobs, and an ability to do that in a lifestyle that everybody really, I think, thinks is great. So thanks very much.